Well, I may be on vacation, but I realize that my curiosity never takes a holiday. And I'm out here in the middle of the ocean, and I realize that I have questions about the Lost Boys that I need to answer. So, I don't know, I think I'm gonna do that. And you may say to yourself, hey, people don't normally talk about the Lost Boys while sailing across the sea. And I say, people are strange.
Question number 1.
How did David and his crew become vampires?
So, the Lost Boys of the title has nothing to do with Peter Pan, although it's likely a reference to that. Instead, this is a group of vampires that cruise the boardwalk of the fictional town of Santa Carla and feed on the unsuspecting people there. They're led by the super handsome Jack Bauer as David here, and there's also Dwayne, who lives in a society, Paul, and Marco S. Preston, Esquire. But even though David is their front man, he's not the boss since they're ruled over by a head vampire. And we'll talk more about him later. But it's established that he's dominant over that group and may have turned one, if not all of them. But where did they come from? Did Max indeed curse them? Or was it something else? There's not a whole lot of clues in the movie, although we know that they're camped out in a sunken hotel, and David seems to know a lot about its history. He says that about 85 years ago, it was one of the hottest hotels in all of California, but it was destroyed back in 1906. Now, there's the insinuation there that he was present for that, but it's also possible that he's just up on the place's history. And the most common thought is that Max was the one that turned David, as well as the others, and that stems from him calling them his sons. So if you're just sticking with the film as it is, that's an easy assumption. You can just sort of roll with the idea that these four dudes that Max had bitten along the way, and that he was their head vampire guy and their sire. But there's actually some ancillary material that says differently, and there's two different versions. First up, shortly after the original film was a big hit, there was the idea to make a sequel, and Warner Brothers thought that that was in order. Joel Schumacher, the director of the first movie, pitched them an idea to do a prequel set in 1906 with the backdrop of the San Francisco earthquake. The studio liked it, so they rolled with it and ordered a script. Schumacher teamed up with Eric Red, writer of Near Dark, to come up with something, and they decided to show the beginnings of the Lost Boys, and they reveal exactly who turns them and how. And it's not Max, and it's actually a bit sillier than that. They're turned by a mysterious vampire named Vlad, and yep, you guessed it, it's Vlad Dracula, and he turns the boys after they try to rob him. So he's their actual sire. But then it gets even wilder because they decide to kill him in order to lift their curse. But nothing happens. And right after they discover, yet another vampire claims to be Vlad's brother. And that is Max, and he takes them under his wing. However, Schumacher changed his mind about that being the direction he wanted to go in, and then tried to pursue a follow-up called The Lost Girls instead. But that never went anywhere. So, the whole Dracula concept isn't really canon, although it does seem to jibe with the idea of that hotel and 1906 being their origin point. There's actually a bit of confusion because there was a sort of official comic book spinoff from Wildstorm called Lost Boys: Reign of Frogs, which is meant to take place between the second and third films. And in it, it's revealed that there's another head vampire in Santa Carla, and she created David. But this seems to be a misreading of the issue, as it's never insinuated, and they seem more clear that he was definitely a product of Max. However, a different series that featured David had him plainly state that Max is the one that made him. Question number 2.
Why would a head vampire have a simple job in a video store?
Like I said, the head vampire is this guy, Max. And our heroes are the Emerson family. Max has formed a bond with their mother, Lucy. One night while she is shopping by the boardwalk, she goes into Max's store, a video store, and it's full of some pretty awesome stuff, including apparently Goonies. And I wonder how many people rent this here and are like, hey, there's a dude who works a couple of stores over that looks exactly like one of the kids in this movie. But Max runs this place, and the first time that we see him, he's there, and the pack strolls in, and there's a moment where there's some tension between them all. Now, when you're watching it, it seems like a guy just angry that some punk kids are in there and are troublemakers. But after watching, you know that this is a dad that's mad at his kids for acting out. They're in the store, and he doesn't want them around, most likely because he doesn't want anyone making the connection between them. But the question is, why is Max doing this in the first place? He's a presumably ancient vampire and pretty damn powerful, and his journey ended up with him as a video store owner. Shouldn't he be in some sort of more elite position somewhere? Well, this may be one that had more context within the time frame, but it makes perfect sense for this to be his job. This was 1987 and peak time for video stores. Keep in mind, this was before Blockbuster was popular, and most video shops were little mom and pop stores that did pretty well. And if you're a pretty powerful vampire lord, there's worse places to be than a chill little beach community. But here's why I think it's actually a really smooth move to pick this as a cover. Again, 1987. This is pre-internet. You couldn't just look someone up online and peep their socials. Stalking took genuine effort. But where's one place that would have your name, your address, and would even be able to tell you if you were going to be home that night? That's right, the video store. Max was very likely able to use this gig to find victims and be discreet about it, a very different tactic than his crew. And if I had to guess, I'd say that he probably chose to come after those who made the cardinal sin of 80s video stores.
Those that were not kind. Those that did not. Rewind.
Question number 3.
What's up with the saxophone guy?
It's hard to believe that one of the most known elements of this movie is the sax man. Fairly early on, the Emerson boys head to the boardwalk to see what the scene is like, and there's a concert going on. But it's not just any performance. Hell no, it's this guy. This shirtless, very well-oiled machine of a man with chains around his neck, skin-tight pants, a freaking codpiece, and a saxophone. He's the band's singer and sax man, doing a pretty rockin' rendition of I Still Believe, which was a cover song by a band called The Call. For very obvious reasons, this man has stood out as being a high point of the movie. Yes, in a movie that's loaded with high points, sax man sits ever so slightly higher. And this is a real guy, an actual fairly famous saxophone player named Tim Capello. He's played with Peter Gabriel, Carly Simon, and was the sax man on Tina Turner's We Don't Need Another Hero. He was known for being a hunky hunk and was even in a band called the Ken Dolls, where he would often perform in just a G string. And his sharp looks started to get him some gigs like an appearance on Miami Vice. And then, Lost Boys, and the scene became a huge sensation, and his cult has only grown, and grown, and grown. And look, this guy toured with Tina Damn Turner and was in her band for 15 years. He was so much a part of her group that when they did the movie What's Love Gotta Do With It in 1993, he played himself in it as the keyboard player. And I guess at first he was slightly resentful that this moment is what he was known for, but that didn't last long, and he now fully embraces it, and has even appeared as that character in things like a gunship music video. But if you're interested in seeing more of that famous sax guy, then you should probably check out the DC Vertigo Lost Boys comics series. It's a series that is separate from the Wildstorm one and is called The Lost Girl, and it actually features him as a character called The Believer. It reveals that his real name is Nico Petropoulos, and he's a vampire hunter who is very, very into the music and oil. Lots and lots of oil. He wasn't allowed in the Santa Carla Vampire Hunters Association because of his peculiar nature, and ultimately sacrifices himself to save the day. But I'm sure that he's fine and will return. I believed that then, and even now.
Do I need to say it?
Question number 4.
How did the crew get into the house at the end?
One of the more long-standing rules of vampires is that they need to be invited into your house to get in. It's not a universally stuck-to rule, as there's plenty of vampire stories in which that whole thing doesn't apply. Movies like Fright Night rolled with it, and those vampires needed to be invited, but not everything follows this, and things like Twilight have vampires that can go anywhere they want. Part of me thinks that the whole thing stemmed from some ancient vampire that was like super polite, and someone was like, how come you never come to my house and kill me? And the vamp was just like, well, I mean, it would be nice to be invited sometime. And the person just sort of took that as they couldn't come over without the invite and felt safe. And man, my grandma probably used to think I was a vampire. How come you never come to visit? Well, Bubby, have you thought of inviting me over? But you don't need an invitation. Just stop by. But sometimes it's just nice to be invited, you know? Anyway, in this movie, they do bring the conceit up. Max waits to be invited into Michael's house before entering, so it's clear that it does matter here. But then, at the finale, David and the group can just enter and continue their assault. Well, this one is pretty easy because it seems as if the invitation does something different here as opposed to merely allowing the vampire to enter. When he's finally revealed, Max says,
"Don't ever invite a vampire into your house, you silly boy. It renders you powerless."
And I'll get more into that whole thing in a little bit, but there's never a point in which you see Michael give invitation to the boys. Granted, I suppose there could be a moment off screen where he was like, you guys should come by sometime, but I highly doubt that. Some have inferred that since Max was invited in, that would extend out to all the vamps under his sway, and by proxy allow them in as well. And still others have theorized that either having an open chimney or Sam running back to get in a nook counted as some sort of invite, but I think it's more clear-cut than that. The invite is not necessary. It's exactly like Max says. The invite means you have no power over the vamps, not that they can't get in. So, entering the premises without the invitation means that they are in the house without any of the protections that Max received earlier. So there's the potential that if they had been invited, that some of the things that killed them may not have worked, like possibly the holy water. So they didn't need any sort of invitation the whole time and could just stop by whenever. And yeah, Bobby, that works for vampires, but grandsons just, I don't know, maybe want you to say, how about Friday night? Come over Friday night.
And what am I even talking about? My grandmother died like 15 years ago. Thanks, guys. Now I'm sad.
Question number 5.
How does the whole invite thing work anyway?
So, like I stated, Max is the head vampire, and at one point, Sam and the Frog Boys, local guys who claim to be vampire hunters, suspect as much. And Max is coming over to the Emerson house to have dinner with Lucy. I feel like I should point out that earlier he had also hired Lucy to work at the video store, so he's her boss. Just hired her, and now he's asked her out, and they've gone to dinner, and he's coming to her house and stuff. You know, just like a new boss should, right? So yeah, we're led to believe that he's the head guy, and Sam thinks so too. And we get to the scene in question. Max comes over for dinner, and before entering, he makes a point for Michael to invite him in, and won't enter until he does so. And that begins the trip down the rabbit hole. While in the house, they give him a few tests to see if he's a vampire, and he passes them all. He can eat garlic, he has a reflection, isn't affected by holy water, and doesn't glow in the dark. So it seems like he's in the clear. But then, in the film's climax, it's revealed that he is indeed the head vampire, and was able to pass the tests because he was invited in, which makes you powerless over said vampire. So that raises just so many questions. First of all, it's important to note that the invitation wasn't necessary. As we said earlier, Max didn't need the invite to enter. He could have come in at any point. Later, in the house, we find out that garlic don't work, but holy water seems to be quite effective. And earlier, we saw that the whole reflection thing is true as well. So Max passing the garlic test can be explained, and who knows about the whole glowing thing anyway, but the holy water spilled on him should have worked, and he shouldn't have had a reflection. We don't see the boys in a mirror in the finale, but we do see the effects of the water. So it's clear that what Max says can be taken at face value. When you invite a vampire into your home, you are powerless against him. And man, does that mess with me. And why is that? Well, for one thing, what defines inviting someone in? Max says that Michael is the man of the house, but that's not true. It's not his house, but he does live there. But Grandpa is the man of the house and the true owner. So I guess that the invitation can come from anyone that lives there. He just says the man of the house thing in order to have an excuse as to why he's not just walking right in. If Lucy had answered the door, I imagine he'd use a different line to get in. But hey, he got invited. So what does that mean? Is it an all-encompassing thing? Michael is the one that invited him, not Sam or the Frog Brothers. So does that mean that it doesn't matter the people, it matters the location? Like if you get invited into a home, no one has those powers against you? Like if you get invited into a home, no one has those powers against you? And is it just the reflections and holy water thing? I mean, they stake him and burn him at the end, and that seems to work. So is that you're powerless except for stakes and fire? What were the odds of that? Why would that even work anyway? If holy water burns a vampire, and it's for the whole holy implications of it, then why would an invitation supersede that? How far does that go? And wouldn't you just make everyone invite you everywhere so that no one has those powers? And then what about Michael? He doesn't have a reflection. Is it because it's the house he lives in? If Sam invited him into the house, would the same rules apply? All right, let's wrap this up. So yeah, it's not the man of the house. Anyone can invite Max in. And when they do, certain mystical elements lose their properties, but not the more tangible one. There's really no explanation for why they do, but I mean, do they need that? It's magic, right? Whatever magical states those things hold is broken by the invitation, that allowing of the vampire entry into your life. Holy water becomes regular water. Mirrors lose whatever incantation allows them to not reflect a vampire. Garlic loses whatever property it has to hurt them. Those are all non-tangible elements. So any physical weaponry that would damage them remains a threat, hence the stake and fire. Those don't harm them due to any magical effect, and more that they just kill things. That's basically proof that the boys don't have some sort of grandfathered invitation through Max in that holy water still kills Paul, whereas it would have no effect on him if he were let in, just as it didn't with Max. But then there's that one last pickle. Michael having no reflection. But here's the thing. I'm not sure that Michael has been invited into the house. Keep in mind, when he was changed, he was already living there. It's not like someone after that was like, come on in, Michael. He just strolled in. Even this scene with Sam doesn't represent an invitation. Michael is outside and Sam opens the window and does pull him in, but that's not an invitation. So, any of those mystical elements still remain in place for Michael, hence the no reflection. Question number 6.
So, if they hadn't been invited in, then why didn't the garlic work?
This one is a minor nitpick, but I have to admit that it's always bugged me. The vampires in this movie tend to operate on traditional rules, or at least variations of them. We know that they can't be in sunlight, even if we never see it kill any of them. We know that holy water works, clearly, as evidenced by Paul. The old stake to the heart is shown to work several times, and most of the other stuff that you associate with vampires is pretty on point. Even if it's altered slightly, like the invitation rule, it's still present. So maybe that makes it a little weirder in the finale when the Frog Brothers are facing off against the glam rock hunkiness of Paul in the bathroom, and they fill up the tub with holy water and popped a bunch of garlic in it. And he says that garlic don't work. And maybe that's not that strange, but it stuck out to me as being an odd variation, considering that most of the other lore aspects were retained, but this one isn't? Why? Plus, earlier in the movie, they're eating Chinese takeout. Yeah, there's gonna be garlic in there. But I suppose it's possible that they could request it with no garlic. But then, like, I mean, are you even eating Chinese food? I've never really thought just how much of the elimination of it ruins certain cuisines. Like, can you imagine Italian food with no garlic? Indian food? I mean, damn, being a vampire would be a curse just for that aspect alone. But setting that aside, knowing that most of the other stuff works, I think that the garlic did work here. But it's not something that just immediately repels them. But it does, like, ward them away and could burn them on touch. So, what if Paul was partially lying to them? He comes in, sees the garlic, and knows that from a couple of feet away, it can't do anything to him. It, as he says, don't work in terms of repelling him. However, once he's in the soup, it will do work. Sure, the holy water is doing the damage, but the garlic in the water is helping to increase the negative effects and helping to take him out even more decisively. Question number 7.
How long has Laddie been with them?
There seems to be a lot of question about this online, even though the movie is very definitive on this one. But in the interest of answering a question that a decent amount of people seem to have, here we go. But this may be pretty short then. Laddie is the youngest member of the Vamp Pack, although he's mostly seen with the lovely Star. It's never said how long that either one of them has been with the group, but they both have distinctive methods of dress that seem to throw people off. Star is generally wearing clothes that people would associate with the Romani, so it's thought that she may be from an older era because of that. Laddie is always wearing a Confederate jacket, which gives the idea that he's been around since that time period. Quick mention that the character of Laddie was originally meant to be older. In the original script, he was 14 years old, and Sam Emerson was only 11. At some point before filming, the two ages were switched to how we know the characters now. But we do know that both Laddie and Star are both half vampires and have not yet fed on human blood. Because of that, when Max is killed at the end, they are restored to their human forms. I think that it's a little far-fetched to think that either one of them went such a long time without making a kill, and based on their aggressive nature, I'm not sure that the boys would allow that anyway. But there's one thing that very clearly tells us how long that Laddie's been around. There's that shot of the milk carton which shows him as a missing child, so people are definitely looking for him, and it gives his birth date as being in 1974 or 76. It's a little hard to see, but either way, since the movie takes place in 87, that makes him either 13 or 11, and he was meant to be an 11-year-old, so based on that, it would appear as if they had only turned him a very short while ago. As for the Confederate jacket, it's often referred to in that way, but it could just very easily be an old-school military jacket or even a stylistic throwback like a Sergeant Pepper's jacket, and the Lost Boys saw him and said, "We'd like to take you home with us. We'd love to take you home with us." Question number 8. Is Grandpa a vampire? One of the most enigmatic characters in the film is Grandpa. When Lucy's marriage crumbles, her and the boys go to live with him, and he has an assortment of oddball rules and exhibits some weird behavior. And even though he seems pretty oblivious to the wild goings-on in the film, he's the one that shows up in the end to save the day, destroying the vampire trying to take over his family. The very last shot of the movie reveals that he is well aware of the danger that they've been facing and that Santa Carla has always had some sort of vampire problem. But is Gramps one of the bloodsuckers himself? Let's review. The first time that we see him, it's broad daylight and he's sleeping. Nearly every time that we see him outside, he's wearing dark sunglasses. He's got a shelf of what he calls root beer that no one else is allowed to touch, and he's got dead animals everywhere. But then, when Max, a vampire lord, is coming to visit, he's mysteriously absent. So, is he also one of the undead? One of the comic book follow ups actually cashed in on this popular theory by making that an actual plot point. In it, it's revealed that he was actually a half vampire and was transformed by the widow Johnson, who is another head vampire, leader of a group of female bloodsuckers. He still works on the side of good, though, and is trying to help the Frog Brothers to bring her down. But, is that canon? Is the old man vampy? The movie never really confirms anything one way or the other, but here's my take. I say he's not. And the reason why I think he's not is that the movie really, really wants you to think he is. From a writing standpoint, it's giving you all these obvious clues as to his nature. And the moment that they start talking about a head vampire, you're like, oh, it's either this Max guy or Grandpa. They're the only two other male characters, so it's one of them. Then it gives you the scene with Max at dinner, so you, the viewer, say, all right, well, it's not Max, and there's all this fishy stuff with Grandpa, and he really seems to be a vampire, so it's him. He's the head vampire. The whole purpose of the ending is the bait and switch. It's to tell you, hey, we dropped all these hints that Grandpa is the head vampire, but it's this guy instead. And Gramps is actually some sort of vampire hunter, as he has a special mechanism built into his car to kill Vamp. That's the whole point of that scene. It's a haha, you thought moment. Of course you think that Grandpa is a vampire. The movie wants you to think that, but it's an obvious misdirect, and the guy is human, knows about the vamps, and is pretty damn sick of them. Question number 9.
How did Sam become a vampire?
Sam Emerson is one of the main characters of The Lost Boys. Played by Corey Haim, he's a teenage kid who is the first one to figure out that something supernatural is afoot, helps his brother overcome his curse, and pitches in to save the day at the ending. Hell, he even takes out one of them all by his lonesome. But then, in the follow-up film, Lost Boys: The Tribe, Edgar Frog returns to help out and take down a new group of vampires that are in town. After they're successful, at the very ending of the film, there's a short scene in which Sam reappears, and it's revealed that he is now a vampire. He and Edgar have a showdown, and they eventually charge at each other, but the results of this clash are left up in the air. However, in the next film, Lost Boys: The Thirst, we learn that Edgar won the fight and staked Sam, and he was in fact a full vampire and not a half one. But how did that happen? How did he get turned? Oddly enough, there's an alternate ending scene that explains it, but that version can't be seen as the actual answer. In it, Sam still appears before Edgar, but they're on much better terms. In fact, we see that Sam is only a half vampire here and is committed to helping Edgar take down a different head vampire, the one that turned him. And that head vampire turns out to be Edgar's own brother, Alan Frog. However, that ending was not used. And even though the third film revealed that Alan was indeed a vampire now, he's only a half vamp and has in no way transformed anyone, as biting Sam and turning him would have transitioned him into a full vampire. So that discards the unused scene and means that someone else is responsible for his transformation. Based on the idea that either way it looks like Sam and Edgar had a falling out, it feels like they were at odds even before his change. There is that comic book that bridges the gap in between the first movie and The Tribe, and that's the one that reveals that Grandpa is a half vampire in it, but nothing happens to Sam in that one. And in fact, we see when Alan is turned, which could work with the alternate ending, but falls apart once the third film is involved. I think that the most logical answer is that the frogs continued to try to locate vampires, and Sam definitely helped. But at one point, Edgar's overconfidence and actual inexperience led to the Emerson lad getting bitten or changed or what have you. That's why he's shown to have resentment towards him and says that he doesn't forgive him for what happened. But then there's the other theory, and that's the one that basically just ignores that the Lost Boys had any sequels at all. And Sam is just fine, still mooning over Rob Lowe. Question number 10.
Are Chris and Nicole the children of Michael and Star?
Well, we can't just ignore those sequels because the second film introduces yet another mystery that we need to look into. The main characters of that one is a pair of siblings named Chris and Nicole Emerson, and they're moving into a new place in California after the death of their parents. So, the house that they go to is said to be that of their Aunt Jillian, and their mom and dad were killed in a car crash. So, based on their last name and the mystery of their parents never being mentioned by name, it's commonly thought that they were meant to be Michael and Star. This is compounded by that comic series I talked about earlier, The Reign of Frogs, which is supposed to be in between parts 1 and 2 because the vamps are trying to find out the location of the young couple, and Edgar tells them that they died in a car crash, even though he could very easily be bluffing or lying. Because of that, it's thought that the two dead couples are one and the same, and that Chris and Nicole are in fact their kids. But there's a lot that contradicts that. First up, their ages. The Tribe takes place in 2008, and the original film is either 87 or around there, so there's around a 21-year gap between the two movies. So the oldest that they could feasibly be is between 20 to 21. However, both of the kids look to be older than that, and Chris, the older brother, was played by Tad Hilgenbrink, who was 26 here, and his little sister Nicole was Autumn Reeser, who was actually 1 year older than Tad. Given that, it's hard to think that they could both be their kids, although I suppose that they could just be playing younger than they are, and the characters could be like 20 and 19 or 18 or something, whatever. But then there's Aunt Jillian, and if she's their actual aunt, well, can't be on Michael's side since we know that he doesn't have any sisters, so she would have to be related to Star. I guess that's certainly possible, but she never mentioned any sort of family or anyone that would be caring about her whereabouts. But the biggest tell is the third film, Lost Boys: The Thirst. In that one, when discussing all of the people that they know, Edgar says that Michael and Star are in hiding, very much alive. I think it's highly probable that the makers of the second film truly intended these kids to be their offspring, but then the makers of the third were like, nah, that doesn't actually make sense. And I'm with those guys. It's certainly possible that they're their kids, but my personal take is that they're not. And that's because it's like, the first movie gives us these two main kids, Sam and Michael, and they're the heroes, and we're on their side and all. And then this movie's like, one's now dead, off screen, and the other is a bad guy vampire. I'm just not cool with having one movie just disregard the characters I enjoyed thoroughly and would like them to have a slightly happier outcome. So, in my take, Chris and Nicole are related, but they're more like second cousins or whatever. So, when it comes to whether or not Michael and Star are still alive, let's just say I still believe.
So there you have it. 10 questions about the Lost Boys franchise. Mainly the first movie, but gotta cover those sequels a little bit, I guess. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with these. Let me know if you like these answers to these questions. Let me know if you have other questions about Lost Boys. Let me know if you are enjoying this lovely view as much as I am. Tell me all that in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you enjoyed the channel, and check out my Patreon page. These guys can help me pay for this cruise, and you can as well too. I need a vacation every once in a while. I mean, I need a vacation from some of these movies. But not this one. This one was actually a great movie to watch. So, hope you enjoyed that. Please check out my other videos. I'll see you very shortly for another great one. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.